All right, 2B.6 parallelogram angles. So in the last one we did, what was that, 2B5 with quadrilateral angles, right? A quadrilateral is just a four-sided figure. This one's a parallelogram, which means that the opposite sides are parallel. So things that would fall into this would be like a rhombus, a square, a rectangle, that kind of thing. A lot of the time, I think of a parallelogram as a smashed rectangle or a smashed square, right? They're always going to have this general shape, right? Because this and this are parallel, and this are parallel, right? Those little arrows mean that they're parallel. So let me blow this up just a little bit. And let's call them A, B, C, and D. Well, like before, it's still a quadrilateral, right? It falls in that family of quadrilaterals. So we can say what we said in the last one, A plus B plus C plus D is 360. Now, there's also going to be some more things that we can say about this. Because of the way that the angles are formed, we can say that angle A is congruent to angle C. And you can say angle B is congruent to angle D. So I can say A equals C, B equals D. The way that I think of that is the opposite angles are congruent, or they're equal, right? That's the congruent symbol there. Congruent normally talks about geometry stuff. Whenever you're talking about shapes, you call them congruent, but it means that their measures are equal. One way to kind of visualize this, and you don't need to write this down, is think back to what we did in the beginning where we had the two parallel lines and a transversal. This here and this here are corresponding. So we could translate the A over here, and then the A would be equal to C. Right? We'd end up having to use this one here to say, well, the A can go down here, and then the A can go over there. So kind of neat, kind of useful sometimes. In the same way, we can say, what did I say? I had the A down here, right? Because the two parallel lines and the transversal. That means that A and D would add up to 180 degrees. They'd add up to a straight angle. So I can say A plus D is 180. Right. So here, I'm going to erase all my extra writing here, and then I'm going to write all the formulas down. So I said A plus D is 180. I could say D plus C is 180. I could say C plus B is 180. And I could say A plus D is 180. These all fall into the category of adjacent angles, or what do we want to call them? Do we want to call them adjacent? Yeah, we'll call them adjacent. We'll say adjacent interior. A-D-J-A-C-E-N-T, interior. Right. Remember, calling things supplementary is the fancy way of saying they add up to 180. Adjacent means that they're next to, right? So this angle and this angle are next to each other, right? Just like D and C are next to each other. So adjacent interior. Interior means that you can't talk about an angle outside of it, right? Interior just means you're staying within the shape. And then the angles, well, that's obvious. And then I already talked about supplementary. So these are the ideas that we're going to need to know here. We need to remember that they add up to 360. We need to know that the opposite angles are congruent. And then we need to know that the adjacent interior angles, or just the adjacent angles, are supplementary. All right, let's start off. Number 2. Well, here's our x, but we're going to have to write an equation here. This and this, well, here, I can't do those little dashes, can I? That means they're congruent. We'll say this angle and this angle are supplementary because they're adjacent. So I can say 13x plus 5 plus 110 is 180, right? Here's my first angle, here's my second angle. They add up and they equal 180. Now this one's a little bit harder than the last assignment we did because we have that x and we're gonna have to solve. So it's just a linear equation. I think this one's going to be a three-step equation for us. Yeah, start off by combining like terms. So I'll say 13x plus 115 is 180. Now I'll subtract 115 and I'll say, well, 13x is, what is that going to be? 80 minus 15 is 65. And then I divide by 13 and I get x equals 5. Now what did it ask us for? It said solve for x. Now I know I didn't talk about this, but it also says each figure is a parallelogram. If it didn't say that, we wouldn't be allowed to do these formulas. All right, number 3. Now this one we have opposite angles, right? And then you should look back up at your notes and say, well, what are opposite angles? Opposite angles are congruent. So this one I think is just a little bit easier than the last one because I'm going to say 53x minus 1 is equal to 105. So I can add that 1 over and say, well, 53x is 106. Then I divide 106 divided by 53, and I get 2. X equals 2. Number 4. These are adjacent angles, so they add up to be 180. So I could say, well, 10x plus 14 plus 76 is 180. So 10x plus, what's that going to be? 7, 8, 90 is 180. I subtract my 90 and I get another 90. 90 times 2 is 180. And x is 9. All right. It would be a good thing to remember that 180 divided by 2 is 90, or you could say, well, 90 times 2 is 180. That helps some of these problems go a little bit faster, I think. Number 5, again, we have adjacent angles, so I'm going to say, well, we have 70 plus 36x plus 2 is 180. So 36x plus, combining like terms, I get 72 is 180. So 36x is 108, and x is 3. Again, we have an adjacent angle, so these are going to add up to 180. So I'm going to say 66 plus 12x minus 6 is 180. So 12x plus 60 is 180. So 12x equals, what is that, 120? And x is 10. All right, very last one. 18x plus 3 plus 123 is 180. So this will be 18x plus 126 is 180. So 180 minus 126 gives me 54. Dividing by 18 gives me x is 3. And that's all. Now, most of these that I did were adjacent angles. They were next to each other. Make sure you don't forget about the rule for opposite angles, like what we did in number 3, right? I think that the adjacent angles are a little bit more difficult, so I did more of those. The opposite angles are also important. Don't forget those. Opposite angles are just a little bit easier. You're just able to set them equal right off the bat. All right. Make sure you know these rules. You don't have to write down all of this, but make sure you know that they add up to 360. The opposite angles are congruent. And adjacent interior angles are supplementary. And supplementary means they add up to 180. All right, that's all.